We're talking about specificity and the way to create a universal character, a universal experience is by being as specific as possible. Welcome to Pajamas and Wrenches, the podcast where we share warm fuzzies for your creative well and cool tools for your creative challenges. I'm PJ Gardner-Schweitzer, author of the Horace and Bullwinkle series and The Great Zudini from HarperCollins, and this is my partner and friend.
I'm Sarah Allen. I am the author of 4 middle grade novels from Macmillan. The most recent is Monster Tree, a middle grade horror novel.
So exciting. All right. Well, today, Sarah, let's talk about it. Let's start with inspiration, like we usually do. So
Yes.
what's been inspiring you lately?
Okay, so I'm going to say this, even though it's going to sound, I don't know how this is going to come across to people, because what's been inspiring me lately is something that everybody knows. It's a very hugely popular acclaimed thing, but I have a very specific reason why it's been clicking with me so much lately and inspiring me.
Okay, I'm
And
so intrigued.
it's The Big Bang Theory.
Okay.
The show. So I've been doing a rewatch of it, which I've never actually watched it through before. I've seen probably most of it off and on since, it's been huge for like a decade. So I'm not, I'm not breaking any ground by saying that The Big Bang Theory has been big for me lately, because everyone loves it. But what I've really appreciated as I've been watching through, I actually started watching it, thinking in my head about Leonard and Penny's pining, growing relationship, and they are annoying the pants off of me.
Oh,
They bug the crap out of me. But let me tell you, I have not been as obsessed with a relationship as I am with Sheldon and Amy since maybe since I watched Frasier in college. um, I I am so in love with their relationship and their dynamic. Um, and I think there are specific things that are really hitting me with Sheldon's character specifically, and his relationship with Amy also specifically. And basically, it comes down to me feeling so relieved at any representation of neurodiversity and asexuality.
okay.
I love it so much. And there are specific things, I mean, there are tons of problems with that show, let's be real. And a good third of it bugs the crap out of me. But there are things that it does really, really well. And I specifically love, there are moments where they let Sheldon be taken very seriously, in both the asexual and the neurodiverse representation, because mostly he is, kind of a lot of times the brunt of the jokes. He's made fun of, and it's not malicious. I even, it's funny. Their whole group dynamic is hilarious. But there are specific moments where they let Sheldon be taken very seriously that I absolutely love. Um, there's 2 examples that I'm thinking of, and I hope it's okay if I'm diving in on these specific moments that I love for this representation's sake. And the projects I'm working on are feature characters with neurodiversity, asexuality, all of that. So I've been kind of paying attention to that. So there's one moment where Sheldon and Penny have been hanging out together a lot because Leonard is gone, and Leonard told them to look after each other. And I love Sheldon and Penny's brother sister relationship.
Yeah.
Super fun. So they've been hanging out, and Penny is like, Sheldon, tell me, something personal that you've never told anyone. And Sheldon's like, okay. And so they kind of have a conversation, and Penny gets vulnerable, and Sheldon's like, okay. And Penny's like, it's your turn. And Sheldon pauses for a second, and he's like, well, I didn't think I was going to tell anyone this, but a while ago, YouTube changed its feedback feature from 5 stars to thumbs up or thumbs down. And I've been telling people that doesn't bother me, but it really, really does. And Penny blows him up. She's like, okay, fine. You're not going to tell me anything serious. And she gets up to walk away, and he's like, here's another thing. You just hurt my feelings. And Penny stops and she's like, what? What did I do? And he's like, I just told you something that was really important to me. And you treated it like it was nothing. And to her credit, Penny stops and she's like, you're absolutely right. I'm very sorry. And I love moments like that where most of the show, he is being, brushed off, but he gets to be taken seriously in that moment. And there's another moment where they make fun of Amy and Sheldon's relationship because it's, so slow. And Amy goes off upset and Sheldon goes in to talk to her and they're kind of having a conversation. And she's like, do you think we'll ever have an intimate relationship? And Sheldon says, yeah, I don't know if this is what it feels like to you, but to me, what we have is incredibly intimate. And Amy smiles kindly and she's like, I think I know that. And so moments like that where this character who's quirky and weird gets to be taken seriously and gets to kind of like be the hero of the story and like kind of show that his experience is just as valid as anybody else's. So there's my long spiel about why that show has been really, really like clicking with me lately.
Why do you think, what is it about that specifically that you're finding inspiring? Like what is it inspiring in you? Do you know?
It's honestly, it's kind of building up a determination in me to kind of do the same thing, like with my characters, where it's like, I want every single one of my books to have neurodiverse representation and asexual representation if I can. And I love the fact that they come at that from different angles. And that's what I want to do. Like someone's experience with asexuality or neurodiversity is going to be a completely different experience than someone else's. They call, it's called a spectrum for a reason. I have conversations with my friends who are also asexual all the time. And it's quite different for each of us. We have different experiences. But I feel like those types of characters are not nearly as uncommon as we think they are.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I have a son who's on the spectrum and, getting the diagnosis, also all of that. It was like, people are like, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. There are going to be certain overlaps, but it's just going to be very different, which by individual. And I'm like, well, that makes sense.
Almost like they're human.
I'm like, so it's just like everybody else. There's just these other things going on that you take into account. That's interesting. I think that asexual rep is another one that's really, I think that most people don't relate to it or understand it well enough. I mean, we live in a very highly sexualized culture.
Yeah, we do.
So we do. And to not have that as a primary part of your thinking or anything, do you know what I mean? Or your makeup, I think is very foreign to most people. And I actually think that people are more understanding of neurodiversity than they are of being asexual.
I totally agree. And I've listened to podcasts and read stuff where the response when you talk about asexuality is they have opinions right away about like, oh, well, you just haven't met the right person, or well, you just haven't had a good experience or whatever. And I just am left thinking that they don't know what they're talking about, right? Okay, you clearly don't understand like what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I think my kitty is just having opinions on things too today.
Well, I'm waiting for she's found her little nook. So her
This is Pajamas and Podcast and Kitties and Dogs.
Kitties and dogs.
Anyway, I totally agree. And I think, but I also think that they're the hypersexualized characters that are like way common on TV and there's what else is a lot of like sitcoms based on besides sex. Like it's so much all about sex. I don't think that's very realistic either.
Because really, I think most of us lie somewhere in the middle. Yeah,
exactly. And I think the number of people who are like in that hypersexualized experience are way less than it's portrayed on TV and in books.
Yeah.
And I think the people on the asexual side of that experience are actually probably way more common than is represented.
I think you're probably right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's this respect. It's just a respect and an ability to try and step outside of your own experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
To relate to characters like that, and find them. I mean, because one of the things you talked about that you mentioned several times was he got to be taken seriously.
Yes.
And so what I kind of hear in that is that we have a tendency to sort of laugh off or joke off or diminish those experiences because we don't understand them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or that perspective, right? Whatever, because we don't understand them. And so like with all of our writing, with all of our storytelling, we're trying to create bridges, right?
Mm-hmm.
Between
Mm-hmm.
your experience and these experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
Drama. And I think that's
Absolutely.
really interesting. And the truth is, though, it's not. What's funny to me is you're like, well, everybody knows the show. And I'm like, yes, but what the thing it inspired you with isn't necessarily what it would inspire anybody else with. Just because something's popular doesn't mean it doesn't have things to give us, right? Like things
Well,
to.
I'm glad you say that.
Oh, no,
Good.
absolutely. Oh,
Well,
yeah.
and the book I'm working on right now, speaking of characters who should be taken seriously, is about a group of 60-plus-year-old women, like 65-year-old women. Speaking of groups that are not nearly well represented enough or taken seriously enough,
Absolutely.
and including some of these, asexual and neurodiverse representation amongst that as well.
Yeah.
So I basically am, trying to take this fire that I feel like Sheldon has lit under me and bring it into, okay, I want the humor and I want the heart from that in this project of like, yeah, they're just like having a normal, like heartfelt experience like everyone is. And like, it's funny and all these like aging is ridiculous. It's funny, it's hard.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
also they take like refusing to let that experience be taken any less seriously than anybody else's.
Yeah. I love it. And the other thing is that we love awkward people. Like
Yeah.
in stories, we like there's something endearing about them. I remember watching Napoleon Dynamite, right, years ago, and just falling in love and being like, and then it reminded me of Harold and Maude, which was this movie.
Oh my gosh, yes. I
Right?
love that movie.
Right? I love that movie too, right? And all weird, super weird, and
So weird.
super specific people. Like these are very like, and yet you could be like, I kind of knew somebody like that. Like,
Yes.
someone, right?
What character sets up like fake suicide scenes for
Oh
his
my
mom
gosh.
to see when he is the weirdest kid, but like he's so endearing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So to our listeners, if you haven't watched it, you've got to find Harold and Maude. It is
Yeah.
brilliant. It's
It's so
old and
comforting too, and like
yeah,
oddly uplifting
it
despite like
is.
its darkness. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then obviously Napoleon Dynamite is hilarious. And
What a pairing right there.
yeah. But you know what I love about it though, and even with Big Bang Theory, right, is you're talking about specificity and the way to create a universal character, a universal experience is by being as specific as possible. And it's counterintuitive, but truly the more specific you are, the more people see that in their life, not necessarily a one-to-one to what you're describing in the story or the character, right? But to the individuality of it. They're like, oh, I know someone who's kind of like that. They do this and this and this. And it's more the feeling it engenders in you, right? I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember talking with so many people during the heyday of The Office that was like, oh, every office has a Dwight in there somewhere. It's like they don't really, but they do.
Yeah.
Like that highly specific character / genius of Rainn Wilson.
Yeah.
It becomes universal. They're like, oh, everybody knows a Dwight.
And that's honestly why those shows last or those stories last is right, because You've done something so individual. And look, I adore romance novels and I adore cozy mysteries, but most of the time they're kind of interchangeable. Some will stay with you,
Yes,
right?
yes.
But to a certain extent, you read those for a different reason, right? Or
Yeah.
you follow stories like that because you want the predictability. And that's important to understand. And you can be someone who loves originality and creativity. I mean, I do. I love weird stuff, but I also really love romance novels and cozy mysteries. I love my happily ever after. I love that the villain
Yes.
gets, you know what I mean? And I think that those all satisfy different parts of our story loving hearts, right?
And I think you can have the best of both worlds. Like, this is what I love so much about Sheldon and Amy's relationship is there is no two characters that have that relationship. Like,
Yeah.
you can see very specifically why those two characters have the relationship that they do and why they end up together. They couldn't end up with anybody else. They really
No.
could.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
you're saying, so many, and I've read as I've been trying to write this novel that has some romantic elements in it as well. I've been reading a lot of rom-coms, and that's been my main struggle with them, honestly, is I'm like, I don't understand why these two characters are together, besides the fact that they're both like pretty, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So that was your inspiration. Is there more about it that you want to talk about that was inspiring?
Oh, just I'm just glad that I got to squee about it.
Yay. Well, I love it. That's
About
kind of why
Sheldon and his weirdness.
but that's why we do this is one of the reasons, right? Is because it's exciting to talk about. Like this is what's getting all the stuff sparking in my brain, right? As opposed to our next thing, which is our
Yes.
challenge. And
Yes.
we're gonna do a little, we're gonna switch so that I'm gonna talk about my challenge right now.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. What have you been
which
dealing with lately?
I saved I saved for this discussion with you, Sarah. Um, so I had a call with my agent, and I write currently what I've published is for younger readers. So it's called early middle grade. My target audience is really like somewhere between 7 and 11, right? Those are my right,
Mhm.
but really 9 and 10 and 11 being like kind of optimum, right? And
Mhm.
they're animal POV and they're humorous and heartfelt, but they're more
They're
humorous,
delightful,
right?
utterly delightful.
But I have felt really strongly. I have a lot of other stories in me, and they're not humorous and heartfelt. They're definitely heartfelt, but there's not so much humor. So I sent this big setup. Everybody's like, "Do we need to know all this?" Yes, yes, you do. So I had sent when I first signed with her, I sent her some of the projects that were partials that I thought, hey, I could do something with them. Well, one of them that I sent I have never known what to do with because initially in my mind it was going to be like upper middle grade. It would be like for 12, 13, maybe 14, but like certainly like upper middle grade. But as I would write it, my problem is so I have great middle grade voice as long as as long as it's humorous and heartfelt. I have great middle grade voice. But if I get serious at all, and these are very serious stories, they're very they're more literary, that sort of thing. They're less commercial. Um, my voice ages up. So I sent this to her, and she's brought it up a couple times. So I think this is the one she's really interested in. And then she offered a book for me to read. She suggested a book for me to read. And I was like, okay, but I hadn't been able to get myself to do it. And I'd been like, why? And I'm struggling with whether or not this story really is middle grade or if it's actually an adult story with a child protagonist, right? And I had this long
Oh, interesting.
conversation with my husband about stories like Pan's Labyrinth,
Hmm.
Children of, no, not Children of Men, City of Lost Children, which is a
Okay.
French, right? Where the protagonist is a child, right?
Hmm.
And they have adult help, right? But the child's the driving force. They're the protagonist, right? But these are clearly not children's movies. They're darker. They're
Right.
right. They're more. I don't know if you did, like whatever the
Pan's
cinematic.
Labyrinth traumatized me as a college student.
Right. It's
So yeah.
yeah, and the little girl looked so much like my youngest sister, Samantha, that I was like,
Oh
at the end
man.
of that, I was like, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So my story is really one about healing. I will never write a dark story where the ending isn't about the light. You are always in my
I
stories,
appreciate that. Thank
right?
you.
On a journey towards healing. That is always important, right? Well, in talking with my husband, he was like, okay, if you do this as an adult window, or for like, if you're writing it for adults, it needs to, you do need to have adult helpers and stuff like this. And I was sitting there this morning and I was really I did a tarot read and it was really wonderful. And all that's right, I'm all hippie now. But when I was really sitting there with it, and I had to ask myself, what makes a story about a child for children versus for adults?
Mm,
Because there's a different, because it's not just that I'm struggling with the voice. I think if I worked at it, I could age the voice down. I think I could, especially if I read the book that she recommended and some other ones, right?
mhm.
Um, but I was sitting there and I was really wondering because, and then in my mind, it became if in my mind, when you write for children, the adults don't help them, right?
Mm,
Ultimately,
interesting.
in my mind,
Mhm.
the child has to figure it out for themselves, right?
Okay.
And the way my husband had described this story for older ones, adults participate. They're not the driving force necessarily, but in children's books, children solve their like it's the community that solves the problem, right? You're
Mhm.
not relying on the parent figure or the adult figures. Now, I don't know if I'm defining that in the way other people would. So I suppose, I mean, this is a challenge, but it's sort of a question.
Mhm.
And some of this is me asking myself, I honestly, I mean, I'm going to be totally clear. I'm not really sure I can age it down, like my voice.
Okay.
And that might be actually something where, for readers, you're not going to get this, but or listeners or viewers, but I have to send it to Sarah to see what you think.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
But do you, and I'm leery of writing something to spec for someone else, even though,
Right.
so I consider myself an intuitive writer. So I think partly what I'm wondering is, am I listening to myself when I say, no, this should be for adults, right? Is that my intuition or is it my fear? Is it,
Gotcha.
you see what I'm saying? So my challenge, all of that now, I don't know how long that was, 5 minutes of me talking, but my
I went on for 10
challenge
about Sheldon, so
is I think my challenge really is figuring out who my audience is for it. Because I have other
Mhm.
stories that I do think are more literary and that I feel voice wise, I have it, I can do it as a child's voice. And
Okay.
I can't tell where my resistance or where the thing is with this. And again, I don't know if you'd need to, Sarah, if you'd need to
Okay.
actually.
No, I think I have a question for you about that
Okay.
that might help me diagnose, as it were. I don't know. Um, it's sort of, I guess it's two ways of asking somewhat of the same question, which is one way of asking it is how much of what's happening does your child character understand? And
Okay.
two, how much of the healing is the child characters, or is it a different character's healing that the child is like facilitating or witnessing, basically?
Okay. That's interesting. In my mind, the child understands as much as everyone in the world does
Okay,
until the moment of clarity. I don't want to give away too much because you know what I
right.
mean? Like in the recording, if in a
Sure.
private conversation, it might be different, but I'm like, I guard my stories sometimes like a dragon with jewels. Uh,
As you
I
should.
think I think the child, I mean, I can give you, I guess, the basic setup, which is it is a fantasy world. In which there's a war that's been going on for many years.
Okay.
And the the children find their way to this old woman. And the old woman, right, like in these war-torn areas, they find her, they're orphaned, they're lost, right, whatever. And then she takes them to safety, right? She takes them
Mhm,
to
mhm.
places that are like less in turmoil. But there are these things there are these monster type things that chase you. Well,
Ooh,
okay. And they've grown in number since the war started. And my main character is a 12-year-old, almost 13-year-old girl.
okay.
And the monsters get the old lady. The monsters get the old woman. And so
Okay.
she has to go get her back. That's the way I've set it up. But of
Gotcha.
course, we're going to understand something that the real monsters are always the humans, right? And
Uh-huh.
that these
Uh-huh.
things that we've perceived as monsters are actually like an embodiment of your trauma.
That is very Pan, like I can see the Pan's Labyrinth roots there a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, I
So
love
you
that.
have to confront the monster in order and therefore confront your pain.
Gotcha.
And by doing that, the monster is no longer a monster, right?
Gotcha.
So my idea is, and I feel very much like children need stories about healing, right?
Mhm.
I just don't know that I'm not sure if this topic works as well for children
Interesting.
because I don't know. Like I said, my agent loves it, but she shared it with another agent at the agency and they were like, yeah, the voice is just a little too old.
Too old. I'm curious what comp title she gave you to read.
She wants me to read, and I understand that I sent her like maybe 1,500 words, right? So
Okay.
we're really talking about this a long time, but
Yeah. I love it. I sometimes I
the
feel like diving in on a specific thing, like
yeah,
we're talking about, makes it more universal, and I learn more about universal tools and strategies doing it this way.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the comp title was The Girl Who Drank the Moon.
Oh, okay, okay.
But I
See, and I'm curious because I think maybe what I would suggest, and that one's fantasy, so that works a little better. But the book that I keep thinking of is Room. Have you ever heard of Room or
I
read
have
Room?
heard of Room, and I'm actually writing that down.
And I
Uh,
don't know this. There's a few reasons why that it might not actually be super helpful because A, it's not fantasy at all. It's contemporary, and
yeah,
B, the child protagonist of the very adult novel is 5 years old. So, which is there's big differences between what a 5-year-old understands and what a 12-year-old understands.
right. Well,
But it's a whole story about a woman being held in captivity in a shed for 7 years, told from the perspective of her 5-year-old who doesn't understand anything.
right. And the book that I thought might be a comp, I mean, these are also huge books, but the book that I pulled out was The Book Thief, which
Oh, yeah,
if I
yeah.
remember correctly, is middle grade, but it's about the Holocaust and death is a character.
That is a really good question. I have not thought about whether I would consider that book middle grade or not. I'm not even sure because Death is not just a character. Death narrates the whole thing. And
Right. And so,
I think it jumps between his voice and the girl's voice and then the middle-aged Jewish man that they're hiding.
okay.
I think it's like perspectives from what I remember across
Okay.
the
So
board.
maybe, you know what? Is the answer just go read some and see where this feels like it?
Well, and now I'm curious about what would happen if you did open it up to multi POV.
Well, see,
And
because there's another character, and then I was thinking of adding this is well, because this is I feel like she needs like a companion in the forest, but I've been trying to go through things, and then I kind of came up with this idea of a white goose. I felt like it needed to be a bird,
I
and then
love that.
to be white, my husband was like, "Oh, an owl," and I was like, "Yeah, an owl," and I was like, "Or it could be a moth," I was like, "Yeah," and then for some reason I was like. Or it could be a goose, and it could be something reincarnated as a goose, or that had been like transformed into a goose, or the
I love
goose
that.
could just talk, but then, you know what I mean? I'm like, are you sliding into your other stuff? And again, I don't want to be too bleh about it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Where you're like, oh, but it's all literary, Anyway,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
actually, we really have
Well,
you.
I would say read a few across the options
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
also play around writing wise. Like see what would happen if you
yeah.
aged the voice down. See if that works and how it feels and and then vice versa. What if you wrote it as if like I think Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman is another one
Okay.
where it's
Yeah.
about a young kid, but it's an adult novel. and
Um,
see if that voice, that vibe feels better, or if like a literary middle grade voice feels better. I don't know.
yeah, it's interesting to me because I feel like the Brits do this better, where they're like, no, this is middle grade. And you're like, your kids must be just wicked smart to be able to pick this up. All right, we should probably, all right, let's move on from this. That was actually really helpful though.
Good, good, good. And
Sometimes
I'm
I'm
so
reluctant.
fascinated by this to see how it goes.
Oh, well, thank you. Sometimes I'm reluctant to read because I don't want to get other people, like I like to keep my voice kind of like my own, but then
Mhm.
sometimes you have to read to kind of know what you can do, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Ways to take it. Okay. All right. So next up we have our resources. Sarah, what are you going to share with us today?
Yes. So, my resource that I've used for a few years now, uh, is called SVS Learn. It stands for School of Visual Storytelling, svslearn.com. And it's an art tool, so it's a drawing tool. But the reason I'm recommending it is because I know so many people who have the desire to, if they're writers, they want to be able to add to their repertoire, to like they have this dream of being an illustrator as well. Or and I do little like comics on my Instagram
Mhm.
and like
You're very cute.
little illustrated poems. But the thing is, I never took an art class at all. I had no idea where to start. SVS Learn I have found to be very, very, very uh all stage friendly. Like whether you've never drawn anything before in your life or whether you're an expert that's wants help developing a portfolio or something like that. It's an database of online art classes, and it's just been super helpful. I love the teachers. I feel like it's opened a whole world up for me as a writer, even that, options and things, whether it's just for like social media content or whether you want to do an illustrated chapter book or whatever. Um, I found it to be very, very helpful. So sbslearn.com.
SVS. Okay, I love it. Okay, so this is funny, but you're probably going to be hearing quite a bit of poetry from Sarah because now our words of wisdom. So you're
Yes.
probably going to be hearing a lot of poetry in our words of wisdom because Sarah and I both really love poetry. And I'm going to share one with you if I can find it. And you're going to be like, that's words of wisdom. Um, I bought this book for those who can see when I was in high school. It was called Immortal Poems of the English Language. And
Ooh.
this is from well, years ago. Let's just say it's been decades. Um, so I went through when I first got it and just highlighted stuff. And there's one poem that's always stayed with me. And I don't know many people who've even heard of the poet. His name is Vachel Lindsay.
Oh,
Um,
you're right. I have not heard that name.
this poem, I believe, was written around World War One. Uh,
Ooh,
and
I love World War One poetry.
it's called The Laden Eye. So Vachel Lindsay, um, The Laden Eyed. Let not young souls be smothered out before they do quaint deeds and fully flaunt their pride. It is the world's one crime its babes grow dull. Its poor are ox-like, limp, and laden-eyed. Not that they starve, but starve so dreamlessly. Not that they sow, but that they seldom reap. Not that they serve, but have no gods to serve. Not that they die, but that they die like sheep.
Wow.
And
Wow.
the last four lines like have always stayed with me. And I think it's the idea, the late night, it's that sense of, are you really living? Are you present? Or do you go through it and then do you ultimately die like a sheep, without questioning, without living?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that, I don't know if that's so much words of wisdom, but it has
I
always
love
stayed
that.
with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right. And so I think, like I said, we're kind of on a poetry kick. So don't be
Yeah.
surprised to hear more. Well, so that's it for us on this episode. It has been great. Sarah, as always, I love our conversations.
Yes.
And we are grateful for all of you who tune in and listen to us. And we hope you come back for our next episode.
Happy writing.
Happy writing.